The church doors felt heavy as I pushed them open. Inside, my daughter Sarah was standing at the front, holding tissues and speaking about memories we never shared. Her husband Tom nodded along, counting dollar signs in his mind. The whole town sat in wooden pews, believing I was gone forever. But I wasn't dead. I walked down the middle aisle and said clearly, "You are celebrating early." Every face turned white like they'd seen a spirit. And this was only the start of my story. I'll tell you everything. First, let me thank you for watching Granny's Voice. Please subscribe and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. We might give you a shout out in our next video. Today's special shout out goes Edie from Tennessee. Thank you for being part of our family. Now, let me tell you everything. The first thing I noticed was bright white lights above my head. Everything hurt like someone had dropped a piano on my whole body. My eyes opened slowly, and I saw machines beeping next to my bed. Tubes were stuck in my arms, and the room smelled like cleaning soap. I tried to wiggle my toes, but they barely moved. My mouth felt like sand, and I couldn't make any sounds. Where was I? What happened to me? The ceiling had a brown stain that looked like a butterfly. My throat was so dry I couldn't even whisper. Footsteps came closer, quick and soft. A lady in blue clothes appeared above me. She had kind brown eyes and gray hair in a bun. Her name tag said Linda. She smiled big and said, "Mrs. Peterson, you're awake. This is amazing. Let me get the doctor right away." She hurried out before I could try to speak. Her shoes squeaked on the shiny floor. Amazing. I didn't feel amazing. I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. Pieces of memories floated in my head like puzzle pieces. Car lights, the sound of metal crashing, sirens wailing in the distance. Linda came back with a man in a white coat. He wore glasses and looked serious but nice. "I'm Dr. Martinez," he said, checking the machines and writing on a clipboard. He asked me questions I could barely answer. "What's your name?" "Margaret Peterson." "How old are you?" 71. "What year is it?" "I think 2025. He nodded like I'd passed a test. My head pounded, but I forced myself to think clearly. "How long?" I croaked, my voice sounding like a frog. Dr. Martinez looked at Linda, then back at me. 3 months, Mrs. Peterson. You were sleeping after your accident. We weren't sure you'd wake up. 3 months. The words hit me like cold water. 3 whole months of my life gone. I swallowed hard, my throat feeling tight. "My family," I whispered, not finishing the sentence. I didn't need to. Linda's smile got smaller, and she looked away, fiddling with the tubes. "They know you're awake now," she said carefully, like she was handling glass. "I'm sure they'll come visit soon." But something in her voice didn't sound right. Sarah, my only child, my daughter. I'd given her piano lessons, helped her with homework, bought her first car. And Tom, her husband, always smiling that fake smile. Where were they? My hand squeezed the white bed sheets. The door stayed closed, silent and still. No one was coming. I closed my eyes and tried to remember the accident. I was driving home from the grocery store. The roads were slippery from rain. There were headlights coming straight at me. The smell of gas. The sound of people shouting. My old blue Honda, the car Sarah always said was too old and embarrassing. Had she even checked on it? Had she checked on me? "Mrs. Peterson, you need rest," Dr. Martinez said, adjusting a machine. "You're getting better, but you're still weak. We'll talk about going home in a few days." I needed to get back to my house, back to my life. I asked for my phone, but Linda handed me a plastic bag with my things. My wallet, my keys, my broken watch. The phone was dead, its screen black and cracked. Another connection to my world, cut off. Linda stayed near my bed, her hands folded. "You're lucky to be alive," she said, her voice warm but sad. "Not many people walk away from crashes like yours." Lucky. I didn't feel lucky. Felt forgotten. I stared at the door again, hoping it would open. Hoping Sarah would walk through with flowers or a card. But the door stayed shut, like a wall between me and the truth. "I want to go home," I said, my voice stronger now. Tomorrow. Linda frowned, but Dr. Martinez nodded. We'll see how you feel in the morning. If you're stable, we can arrange it. I lay back, the pillow rough against my neck. The machines kept beeping, reminding me how fragile I was. I looked at the door one more time, willing Sarah to appear with some excuse, some reason. But it remained closed, keeping secrets I needed to know. 3 months and nobody came. That thought burned in my chest like fire. When Linda came back to check my tubes, I'd made up my mind. Call me a taxi tomorrow, I told her, my voice quiet but firm. I'm going home. She nodded, her face unreadable. I turned toward the window where morning light was creeping through the blinds. The city lay outside, its tall buildings and green trees waiting for me. So did Sarah. So did answers. I closed my eyes, the pain in my chest becoming a dull ache. Whatever was waiting at home, I'd face it head-on. Had to. The taxi bumped to a stop, and I handed the driver a wrinkled $20 bill. My hands shook as I held the money. My legs wobbled when I stepped onto the sidewalk. The spring air filled my lungs with the smell of flowers and fresh grass. My house stood before me, a white cottage with blue shutters, the kind of place I'd made into a home for a family that seemed to have forgotten me. The grass was tall and messy, weeds growing everywhere, and the mailbox was stuffed so full that letters were falling out. 3 months and nobody had taken care of anything. I held my plastic bag of belongings and walked slowly toward the front door. Each step made my knees hurt, reminding me how weak the coma had made me. The air smelled like roses from my neighbor's yard, sweet but mocking since my own garden was dying. I fumbled with my keys, the lock stiff from not being used. The door creaked open with a low groan that echoed in the empty hallway. Inside, dust covered my wooden table where Sarah and I used to eat Sunday dinner. The air smelled musty, and I noticed my cat's food bowl in the corner, empty and dirty. Where was Whiskers? Had Sarah even fed him? I set my bag down, my chest tight, not from pain but from feeling so alone. The living room looked exactly the same, the couch cushions still dented from my last nap before the accident. But the silence felt wrong, heavy, like the house was holding its breath. I walked to the window and pulled back the faded curtains. Sunlight poured in, showing tiny specks of dust dancing like ghosts. Through the window, I could see the front yard again, its brown grass and broken fence a sign of neglect. I was about to go upstairs when I heard a sharp gasp from outside. Across the street, a woman stood frozen on her lawn, her hand over her mouth. It was Betty, my neighbor for 15 years. She stared at me like I was a ghost. Her bright red scarf fluttered in the breeze, and she took a shaky step forward. Margaret! Margaret Peterson! She called out, her voice shaking. You're alive. I walked onto my porch, confused. Betty, what's wrong? Of course I'm alive. My voice sounded scratchy and unused. She shook her head, her eyes wide with shock. But they said you died, she exclaimed. Sarah told everyone. She's holding your funeral service right now at Holy Cross Church. Her words hit me like a sledgehammer. I stopped walking, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Funeral. My funeral. I demanded, my voice sharper than I meant it to be. What are you talking about? Who said I died? Betty wrung her hands, the scarf sliding off her shoulders. Sarah and Tom, she whispered. They organized everything. Said you didn't make it after the accident. He paused, looking away. The whole neighborhood is there, Margaret. Everyone thinks you're gone. The world started spinning. Sarah and Tom, my own daughter and son-in-law, telling everyone I was dead. I gripped the porch railing so tight my knuckles turned white. The spring breeze felt cold now, cutting through my thin hospital shirt. They said I was dead, I repeated slowly, my voice low and dangerous. Betty nodded, tears filling her eyes. I'm so sorry, Margaret. We all believed them. I even brought flowers to the service. She trailed off, crying softly. I turned away, looking at my house. My house, my life, left to rot while they played their sick game. I thought about Sarah as a little girl, asking me to braid her hair, Tom, grinning when he asked to borrow money for his business ideas. They'd planned this, hadn't they? While I lay in that hospital bed, fighting to live, they'd buried me in their minds and maybe in their hearts too. But why? Money. My savings account. My house. The thought made me angry, a slow burning rage that made my shaking hands steady. I looked back at Betty, her face pale with shock. "Where's Holy Cross Church?" I asked, even though I knew the way. I needed to hear it to make it real. "Down Maple Street, about 15 minutes walking," she said softly. "Margaret, are you okay? Should I call someone?" "I'm fine," I cut her off, my voice hard as stone. I turned back toward my house, catching my reflection in the hallway mirror as I passed. Gray hair, thin cheeks, eyes like chips of ice. I barely knew myself, but the woman in the mirror had a purpose. I grabbed my sweater from the closet, ignoring the ache in my bones. The door swung shut behind me with a hollow sound, and I stepped onto the sidewalk. The street was quiet, the kind of spring afternoon when children should be playing and neighbors should be chatting. Instead, it felt like a stage set for one person, me, and the truth waiting at Holy Cross Church. I walked faster, my legs getting stronger with each step. The church wasn't far, its tall spire cutting through the sky like a needle. I could hear bells ringing faintly, slow and sad, calling me forward. My mind raced, putting together Betty's words. A funeral. My funeral. Sarah speaking about memories, Tom nodding along. They'd made my life into a show, a lie for everyone to see. I clenched my fists, my broken watch pressing into my palm. Whatever game they were playing, it ended today. The bells got louder as I rounded the corner, and Holy Cross Church appeared ahead, its stone walls gray in the afternoon light. My heart wasn't pounding from weakness anymore, but from a fire I hadn't felt in years. They thought I was gone. They were wrong. The streets opened up before me, lined with oak trees and spring flowers, but I could barely see them. My legs hurt with each step, reminding me of the months stolen from my life. But I kept going, pushed forward by anger hotter than the May sun. The air carried the smell of fresh bread from the corner bakery, but it couldn't hide the bitter taste in my mouth. Sarah, my daughter, my own blood, had declared me dead. Tom, with his smooth words and greedy eyes, had helped her. Why? The question ate at me like a splinter as I walked toward Holy Cross Church. Maple Street was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes every sound louder, leaves rustling, a car engine humming, church bells calling me closer. I passed the ice cream shop where I used to take Sarah on summer afternoons. The memory hurt, remembering her at 8 years old, promising to take care of me when I got old. She'd lied then too. My fingers curled into fists, the watch on my wrist ticking like a countdown. A woman pushing a stroller walked by, her eyes getting wide when she saw my face. "Margaret Peterson," she muttered, then hurried away, her wheels squeaking on the concrete. I stopped walking, my heart racing. Did the whole town think I was a ghost? The thought made me walk faster. The church's bell tower was visible now above the trees, and I could see its big wooden doors. I crossed a small playground, the same one where I used to push Sarah on the swings. Another memory surfaced, painful and sharp. Sarah at 25, sitting in my kitchen asking for money. "Just until I get back on my feet, Mom," she'd said, not looking at me. "Tom's business is about to take off." I'd written the check, ignoring the warning voice in my head. Months later, I found out she'd spent it on a vacation to Hawaii with Tom. I'd forgiven her like always, but this, telling everyone I was dead, this was different. This was betrayal carved deep into my heart. The bells rang again, louder now, vibrating in my chest. I turned another corner and Holy Cross Church came into full view, its stone walls glowing in the afternoon sun. Flower arrangements lined the front steps, their petals scattered on the ground like confetti for a cruel party. My breath caught, not from being tired, but from the weight of what I was about to face. I thought of Tom's voice, honey-sweet as he complimented my cooking, my house, my life. "You've built something beautiful, Margaret," he'd said once. His eyes calculating even then. I'd brushed off the feeling, but now I saw it for what it was. greed dressed up as kindness. A mother with 2 children walked past me, her glance lingering too long on my face. I kept moving forward, my shoes scuffing the pavement. The church was so close now, its doors just across the street. I could hear voices from inside, a soft murmur seeping through the stone walls. My hand touched the broken watch. Its hand stopped at 3:15, the time of my accident maybe, or the moment my life broke apart. I didn't know for sure. What I did know was that Sarah and Tom had crossed a line so deep there was no going back, and I was done forgiving and forgetting. I stopped at the edge of the sidewalk, the church's shadow falling across me like a blanket. The doors were thick oak, carved with crosses, their metal handles worn smooth by thousands of hands seeking comfort. To me, they were a gateway to truth, to justice. My chest felt tight, not with pain but with purpose. I thought about Sarah's fake tears, Tom's practiced sadness. They'd convinced everyone I was gone, but I wasn't. I was here, and they were about to learn what that meant. My hand reached for the door handle, the metal cold under my fingers. The singing got clearer, a soft chorus of mourning for a woman who wasn't dead. My heart beat like a drum, steady and strong with rage and determination. Whatever waited inside, lies, excuses, or something worse, I was ready. Had to be. The bells rang one more time, and I tightened my grip on the handle. The door was starting to move when I heard my name being sung inside. My funeral hymn. For a moment I almost laughed. They were singing me to my grave, but I was very much alive. The heavy oak doors of Holy Cross Church groaned as I pushed them open, the sound cutting through the soft hymn like a knife through silk. The air inside was thick with the smell of candles and flowers, and flickering light from dozens of candles made shadows dance on the colorful windows. Rows of wooden pews stretched before me, filled with faces I'd known for years. Neighbors, friends from the grocery store, people from my book club. They all stopped singing, their eyes growing wide as I stepped into the light streaming through the open doors. I let the moment hang in the air, my heart beating with cold, steady fire. "You're celebrating a bit early, aren't you?" My voice rang out sharp and clear, slicing through the silence like a blade. Gasps rippled through the crowd like waves. A woman in the third row clutched her chest and whispered, "Ghost," to her husband. An elderly couple near the back stumbled toward the aisle, their footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. I stood firm, my eyes locked on the front pew where Sarah and Tom sat. Their heads snapped toward me like puppets on strings. Sarah's face turned white as paper, her mouth hanging open like she'd forgotten how to speak. Tom's hand tightened on his tie, his knuckles showing white, his usually confident smile nowhere to be found. The hymnals trembled in people's hands, and the candles near the altar flickered as a breeze swept through the open doors behind me. It felt fitting, like nature itself was helping me shatter their lie. I took a step forward, my shoes clicking on the polished floor. The pain in my chest was completely gone, replaced by a clarity I hadn't felt in months. "Thought I was dead, did you?" I said, my voice low but carrying to every corner of the church. "Funny how quickly you moved on." The crowd shifted uncomfortably, whispers buzzing like angry bees. Sarah lurched to her feet, her dress wrinkled, and hurried down the aisle toward me. "Mom, what are you doing here?" she hissed, her voice mixing fear and anger. She grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in, but I pulled away easily. My strength surprised even me. Up close, I could see sweat on her forehead and the way her jaw twitched. Guilty. The word burned bright in my mind. "Mom," I repeated, loud enough for everyone in the front rows to hear. "You don't get to call me that. Not after this." I gestured around the church, at the flowers, at the framed photo of me on a stand near the altar. It was from last Christmas, me smiling and happy, not knowing what was coming. "You buried me, Sarah. You and him." I nodded toward Tom, who hadn't moved from his seat. His eyes darted around like a trapped animal's. Sarah's voice dropped to a pleading whisper. "Mom, you don't understand. It was a mistake. We thought." "A mistake?" I cut her off, my voice rising. 3 months in the hospital, and you never visited. But you found time to plan this. I swept my arm toward the pews, the mourners, the elaborate lie they'd constructed. What was it, Sarah? The house. My savings. My insurance money. The whispers grew louder, a tide of shock and judgment washing over the church. Tom finally stood up, smoothing his jacket with shaky hands, and walked toward us. His expensive shoes clicked on the floor. "Margaret, please," he said, his voice syrupy but strained. "This isn't the right place for this. Let's talk outside, away from everyone." I laughed, a harsh sound that bounced off the stone walls and made several people flinch. "Oh, we'll talk, Tom, but not on your terms." I turned back to Sarah, my voice steady as steel. "I gave you everything. Dance lessons, college, help with your rent when Tom's businesses failed. And this is how you repay me." Sarah's eyes flicked to the crowd, then back to me. "You're making a scene," she muttered, reaching for my elbow again. "Let's go home." I stepped back out of her reach. "No, you don't get to control this anymore. Not ever again." My gaze swept the church, taking in the stunned faces, the half-burned candles, the doors still swinging slightly in the breeze. Tom reached us then, his smile tight and fake. "Margaret, you're not well. You need to rest to recover from your accident." His words were a performance for the crowd, but I could see the panic in his eyes, the cracks in his perfect facade. "I'm well enough to see what you've done," I said, my voice ice-cold. "And I'm well enough to make sure everyone else sees it too." I turned to face the congregation, raising my voice so everyone could hear. "This isn't a funeral. It's theft, and I'm not dead yet." A murmur of agreement rippled through the pews. I caught several people nodding, several angry glances directed at Sarah and Tom. Sarah's face reddened, and she grabbed my arm again, harder this time. "Enough," she snapped, trying to pull me toward the doors. "You're embarrassing yourself." I yanked free, my strength surprising both of us. "You don't get to decide when it's enough," I said, my voice a low growl that made her step back. I turned and walked toward the doors, the crowd parting before me like water. The spring air hit my face as I stepped outside, fresh and clean after the stifling atmosphere inside. Behind me, I heard Tom's sharp whisper to Sarah, the shuffle of confused feet, the rising tide of voices as people began to talk among themselves. They could try to explain this away, try to save their reputations, but it was too late. The truth was out, raw and ugly, and everyone had seen it. I started down the church steps, my mind already racing ahead to what came next. I needed real answers, not their lies and excuses. My old friend Janet, who worked at the bank, would know about my accounts. She'd always warned me about Tom's spending habits and Sarah's expensive tastes. The street stretched before me, lined with blooming dogwood trees, their white petals drifting down like snow. I walked faster, my legs getting stronger with each step. My hands clenched into fists, the ache in my chest now just a distant memory. Whatever Sarah and Tom had been planning while I lay unconscious, I would find out. I would stop them. The afternoon sun felt warm on my face, and for the first time in months, I felt truly alive. They'd tried to bury me, but they'd failed. Now it was my turn to fight back, and I intended to win. The coffee shop smelled like fresh bread and roasted beans, the kind of place where neighbors gathered to share news and gossip over steaming cups. I sat at a corner table, the manila folder Janet had given me unopened in front of me. My hands kept touching its edges nervously. The coffee I'd ordered sat untouched, getting cold while I worked up the courage to look inside. A crack ran down the wall beside me, jagged and deep like the crack in my life. I'd come here after leaving the church, needing somewhere quiet to think, away from all the shocked whispers and staring eyes. The door chimed, and Janet walked in, her brown hair pulled back in a ponytail, her bank uniform wrinkled from a long day. She spotted me and slid into the chair across from me with a heavy sigh. "You look terrible, Maggie," she said, but her voice was kind and worried. She set another thick folder on the table, and it landed with a soft thud that seemed to echo in my chest. "I brought copies of everything." Bank statements, insurance claims, property transfers. You're not going to like what you see. I looked at the folders, my stomach twisting into knots. I didn't sleep last night, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Show me what they did. Janet leaned forward, her fingers drumming nervously on the table. Are you sure you want to do this now? After what happened at the church, half the town is talking. Maybe you should rest first, process everything. Show me, I repeated, meeting her eyes with a steady gaze. She sighed and opened the first folder, papers spilling out like evidence of a crime. Legal forms, signatures, stamps that looked too official to be fake. My life reduced to paperwork and lies. This, she said, sliding a document toward me, is a death certificate. Yours. Filed 6 weeks ago. My name stared back at me in crisp black letters. Margaret Louise Peterson, deceased. The paper shook slightly in my hands, not from weakness but from pure rage. They forged it, I said, the words tasting like poison in my mouth. Janet nodded grimly. Sarah filed it with the county clerk. Tom hired some fancy lawyer from the city to push all the paperwork through fast. They've been busy, Maggie. Your house is already listed for sale. Your bank accounts have been drained. I set the certificate down carefully, my fingers curling into fists. My house, the little white cottage I'd turned into a home, the place where I'd raised Sarah, where we'd had birthday parties and Christmas mornings. Now it was just another asset to be sold off. My savings account, I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. 40 years of teaching, putting away every penny I could. Where did it go? Janet rubbed her forehead, looking older than her 50 years. Tom claimed to be your power of attorney. Said you'd signed the papers before the accident, giving him control if anything happened to you. I never signed anything like that, I said firmly. The words came out sharp and clear, cutting through Janet's explanations like a knife. She nodded, her expression grim. I figured as much. But the paperwork looked legitimate. The bank had no choice but to honor it. She slid another paper across to me, a bank statement showing my account balance. $0.37. 40 years of careful saving gone. I thought about all those years, teaching children their letters, grading papers late into the night, putting away money for my future. Sarah's future too, I'd thought. How did they get away with it? I asked, my voice barely controlled. Janet glanced around the coffee shop, making sure no one was listening. They claimed you died alone in the hospital. No visitors, no witnesses to contradict their story. Sarah cried at the bank, said she was overwhelmed with grief but needed to take care of your affairs. It was convincing. She paused, her voice getting softer. Tom's smooth, Maggie. He had all the right papers, said all the right things. We had no reason to doubt them. I laughed, but there was no humor in it, only bitterness that tasted like old coffee grounds. Janet leaned closer, lowering her voice. But there's good news. You're alive, obviously. That means everything they did is fraud. The death certificate, the power of attorney, all of it. You can fight this, but it won't be easy. They've got a head start and money, your money, to hire lawyers. I stared at the papers scattered across our table, each one a piece of the puzzle that was my stolen life. What do? I asked, not because I was helpless but because I needed to hear the steps out loud, needed to make them real. Get a lawyer. A good one, not someone local they might have influence over. File charges for fraud, forgery, theft. Document everything. Janet tapped the folders with her finger. I've made copies of all the bank records, including the suspicious transactions. This shows a pattern of deception. She looked at me seriously. But Maggie, be careful. People who do this kind of thing don't just give up when they're caught. They might try something desperate. I nodded, her words sinking in. Sarah and Tom had crossed lines I never thought possible. If they could fake my death, steal my money, what else might they do? I'll find a lawyer tomorrow, I said, my voice gaining strength. Someone from the city, someone they can't sweet-talk or intimidate. I gathered the papers, their weight somehow comforting now. Evidence. Proof of what they'd done. Janet, thank you. For the records, for believing me. She reached across and squeezed my hand. You're my friend, Maggie. I should have questioned things more when they first came in. Maybe I could have prevented some of this. I shook my head. You couldn't have known. They fooled everyone. But even as I said it, I wondered how many other people had suspected something but stayed quiet. Janet stood up, gathering her purse. There's something else. Tom's been making inquiries about your insurance policy. The life insurance you have through the school district. It's a big payout, Maggie. $250,000. My blood ran cold. Life insurance. Course. That's what this was really about. Not just my house or my savings, but the insurance money that would only pay out if I was actually dead. They're not just stealing from me, I said slowly, the full horror of it dawning. They're trying to profit from my death. Janet nodded grimly. Like I said, be careful. After she left, I sat alone with the folders, the coffee shop's noise fading into background. I thought about Sarah as a little girl, how she used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, how Tom had charmed his way into our family, always with a new business idea, always needing just a little help. I'd enabled them, I realized. Every time I'd bailed them out, every check I'd written, every excuse I'd accepted. I'd taught them that my money was their money, that I would always forgive, always forget. Well, not this time. This time they'd gone too far. My house felt different when I walked in that evening. Not just empty but violated somehow. I moved through the rooms slowly, seeing things I'd missed before. The family photos on the mantel had been rearranged. Some were missing entirely. In my bedroom, drawers were slightly open, as if someone had been searching through them. My jewelry box sat on the dresser, but when I opened it, my grandmother's diamond ring was gone. The ring I'd planned to give Sarah on her wedding day. She'd already taken it. I sat on my bed, the mattress creaking under my weight, and looked around the room where I'd slept for 30 years. Everything felt tainted now, touched by their greed and lies. But this was still my home, still my life, and I wasn't going to let them take it without a fight. I reached for the phone on my nightstand and dialed information. I need a lawyer, I told the operator. Someone who handles fraud cases. Someone good. As I waited for the connection, I caught sight of myself in the dresser mirror. The woman looking back at me wasn't the same person who'd left for the grocery store 3 months ago. This woman had survived a coma, discovered her daughter's betrayal, and walked into her own funeral to confront the truth. This woman wasn't going to back down or forgive easily. The phone rang, and a crisp professional voice answered. Hartwell and Associates, how can I help you? I took a deep breath, steadying myself. My name is Margaret Peterson, and I need help. My daughter faked my death to steal my inheritance, and I have proof. There was a pause, then the voice became more interested. I think you'd better speak with Mr. Hartwell directly. Can you come in tomorrow morning? The law office smelled like leather and old books, with tall windows that let in streams of morning sunlight. I sat across from Mr. Hartwell, a man in his 50s with kind eyes and graying hair. The folders from Janet were spread across his massive wooden desk like pieces of a puzzle. He studied each document carefully, occasionally making notes on a yellow pad. This is quite a case, Mrs. Peterson, he said finally, looking up at me over his reading glasses. Your daughter and son-in-law have committed multiple felonies. Fraud, forgery, theft, filing false documents with the state. Can you help me get my money back? I asked, leaning forward in the leather chair. My hands were folded in my lap, but inside I was shaking with nervous energy. Mr. Hartwell nodded slowly. We can certainly try. The good news is that you're very much alive, which makes their entire scheme fall apart legally. We'll file an emergency injunction to freeze all your assets, stop the house sale, and reverse the bank transfers. He picked up his pen, tapping it against his desk. The bad news is that some of the money may already be spent. We'll have to trace where it went and try to recover what we can. I felt a surge of hope mixed with anger. How long will this take? Several months, possibly longer if they fight it, he admitted. But Mrs. Peterson, there's something else we need to discuss. This wasn't just theft. This was attempted murder by fraud. If your daughter had successfully collected on your life insurance while you were alive, that's a serious crime. We need to involve the police. The word murder hit me like a slap. I'd been thinking of this as betrayal, as greed, but not as something that could have killed me. What do you mean? I whispered. Mr. Hartwell's expression grew serious. If they had convinced the insurance company you were dead, they would have collected $250,000. But what happens when you eventually woke up from your coma? You would have been a problem, Mrs. Peterson. A living, breathing problem that could expose their lie. The implication hung in the air like a dark cloud. I felt cold suddenly, despite the warm sunlight streaming through the windows. You think they might have? I couldn't finish the sentence. I think we need to be very careful, he said gently. And we need to move quickly. That afternoon, I found myself at the police station, sitting in a small room with Detective Morrison, a woman about Sarah's age with short brown hair and sharp eyes. She listened to my story without interruption, taking notes as I explained about the forged death certificate, the stolen money, the fake funeral. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and whistled low. Mrs. Peterson, this is one of the most brazen fraud cases I've seen in 20 years on the force. Your daughter and son-in-law are looking at serious prison time. Can you arrest them? I asked, surprised by how much I wanted the answer to be yes. Detective Morrison nodded. We'll need a day or two to get warrants, but yes. We have enough evidence for multiple charges. She paused, studying my face. Are you prepared for this, Mrs. Peterson? Once we arrest them, this becomes very public. The media will probably pick up the story. Your family situation will be front-page news. I thought about that morning's scene at the church, how the whole congregation had seen Sarah and Tom's lies exposed. Detective, they made it public when they held my funeral. I'm just setting the record straight. The next morning I woke up to my phone ringing. It was Betty from across the street, her voice excited and breathless. Margaret, you need to turn on Channel 7 right now. I fumbled for the remote, my heart pounding. The morning news was just starting, and there was Sarah's picture on the screen next to mine. Local woman arrested for faking mother's death, the headline read. The reporter's voice was crisp and professional as she explained how Sarah Peterson and her husband Tom had been taken into custody on charges of fraud and theft. My hands shook as I watched footage of them being led away in handcuffs. I should have felt victorious, but instead I felt empty. This was my daughter, the little girl I'd rocked to sleep, taught to ride a bike, helped with homework. How had we gotten here? The reporter was interviewing people from the neighborhood, including Betty, who was telling everyone how shocked she was. Margaret Peterson is a wonderful woman, she said into the camera. She didn't deserve this betrayal from her own family. The word betrayal echoed in my mind as I turned off the TV. That's exactly what it was, but knowing it didn't make it hurt any less. Later that day, I drove to the cemetery where my parents were buried. I needed somewhere quiet to think, somewhere peaceful. I sat on the grass next to their headstones and talked to them like I used to when I was a little girl. I don't know what I did wrong, Mom, I whispered to the marble stone carved with her name. I gave Sarah everything I could. Maybe too much. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves overhead, and I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. My parents had raised me to be strong, to stand up for what was right. They would have been proud of me today. The sun was starting to set when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to see a woman about my age walking toward me, carrying a small bouquet of flowers. She looked familiar, but I couldn't place her until she got closer. Mrs. Peterson. I'm Carol Williams. I was one of your students about 40 years ago. She had graying hair and laugh lines around her eyes, but I could see the little girl I'd taught to read. Carol. My goodness, look at you. I stood up, surprised by how happy I was to see her. She gave me a gentle hug, the kind that says more than words ever could. I saw the news, she said softly, settling down on the grass beside me. I wanted to find you and tell you how sorry I am, but also how proud I am of how you handled it." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "You know," Carol continued, "you always taught us that honesty was the most important thing. That lying might seem easier in the short term, but the truth always comes out eventually. I've never forgotten that lesson." Her words hit me harder than I expected, and I felt tears starting to gather in my eyes. "I tried to teach Sarah the same thing," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know where I went wrong." Carol shook her head firmly. "You didn't go wrong, Mrs. Peterson. Some people choose the easy path even when they know better. That's not your fault." She placed her flowers on a nearby grave, then turned back to me. "But you chose the hard path. You could have stayed quiet, let them get away with it, avoided all this publicity and pain. Instead, you stood up for the truth. That takes courage." I looked at this woman who had once been my student and realized she was now teaching me. Over the next few weeks, my life settled into a new routine. Mr. Hartwell called regularly with updates on the legal proceedings. Sarah and Tom had hired expensive lawyers, but the evidence against them was overwhelming. My house sale had been stopped, my bank accounts were being restored, and the insurance company had launched its own investigation. I started taking walks around the neighborhood, surprised by how many people stopped to talk to me, to tell me they supported what I'd done. Mrs. Carney from the flower shop gave me free roses for my trouble. The mailman, Jerry, told me his own story about a relative who had stolen from elderly family members. I realized that my situation wasn't unique. Financial elder abuse was more common than I'd ever imagined, and many victims stayed silent out of shame or fear. That's when I got the idea to speak publicly about what had happened to me. Not for revenge, but to help other people recognize the warning signs and find the courage to fight back. I called the senior center and volunteered to give a presentation about protecting yourself from financial fraud. The response was overwhelming. They had to move it to the high school auditorium to accommodate everyone who wanted to attend. The night of my presentation, I stood backstage feeling more nervous than I had in years. Through the curtains, I could see hundreds of people filing into their seats. Elderly couples, middle-aged children worried about their parents, even some young adults who wanted to learn how to protect their grandparents. Carol was in the front row, giving me an encouraging smile. Betty was there with her whole book club. Even some of my former students, now adults with families of their own, had come to hear me speak. As I walked onto that stage, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Pride. My speech lasted an hour, but it felt like minutes. I told my story simply and honestly, explaining the warning signs I had missed, the steps I had taken to fight back, and the resources available to other victims. When I finished, the applause was thunderous and lasted several minutes. During the question and answer session, person after person stood up to share their own stories. A woman whose son had stolen her credit cards. A man whose daughter had manipulated him into signing over his house. Each story broke my heart, but also made me more determined to keep speaking out. After the presentation, people lined up to talk to me personally. An elderly man named Robert shook my hand and said, "You've given me the courage to confront my grandson about my missing jewelry." A woman named Alice hugged me and whispered, "I thought I was the only one going through this. Thank you for making me feel less alone." These conversations went on for over an hour, and I realized that sharing my pain had somehow lessened it. By helping others, I was healing myself. Carol waited until everyone else had left, then walked me to my car. "You've found your calling, haven't you?" she said with a knowing smile. I thought about that as I drove home through the quiet streets. Maybe she was right. Maybe this betrayal, as painful as it had been, was leading me toward something important. The next morning I woke up to my phone ringing. It was a producer from a national morning show, wanting to interview me about elder financial abuse. Then another call from a magazine writer. Then a request from a law enforcement training academy to speak to their detectives about recognizing fraud cases. Suddenly, I was busier than I'd been in years. The legal case moved forward slowly but steadily. Sarah and Tom pled guilty to avoid a trial, probably hoping for lighter sentences. They were ordered to pay full restitution, though Mr. Hartwell warned me that getting the money back might take time. Sarah was sentenced to 2 years in prison, Tom to 3. I didn't attend their sentencing hearing. I'd said everything I needed to say at the church that spring day when I'd walked into my own funeral. Now it was time to look forward, not backward. The woman who had been betrayed and nearly erased was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone with a purpose. I started a support group for victims of family financial fraud. We met every Tuesday evening at the community center, sharing stories, advice, and encouragement. Some weeks we cried together, other weeks we celebrated small victories. There was Martha, whose nephew had stolen her entire retirement account. David, whose daughter had used his credit cards to fund a gambling addiction. Susan, whose brother had forged her name on a reverse mortgage. Each person who walked through our doors was carrying the same burden I had carried. The pain of being betrayed by someone they loved and trusted. But our group was about more than just sharing pain. We helped each other navigate the legal system, find good lawyers, deal with banks and insurance companies. We celebrated when Martha got her nephew arrested and prosecuted. We cheered when David's daughter finally agreed to enter rehab and start paying restitution. We supported Susan through the difficult process of reversing the fraudulent mortgage. Slowly, each of us was rebuilding not just our financial lives, but our ability to trust, to hope, to believe in the possibility of justice. We were learning that surviving betrayal was only the first step. The real work was in healing and moving forward. 6 months after that day at the church, I stood in my garden planting spring bulbs. The house was mine again, legally and emotionally. I'd had the locks changed, replaced the family photos with pictures of my students and friends, and turned Sarah's old bedroom into an office where I worked on my advocacy projects. Whiskers had been returned to me by a neighbor who'd been caring for him. Apparently Sarah had just abandoned him when she thought I'd died. Now he sat in a patch of sunlight, watching me work with the patient attention that only cats possess. As I knelt in the dirt, my hands covered in soil, I thought about the woman I'd been before the accident. That Margaret had been too trusting, too willing to overlook red flags, too afraid of conflict to confront difficult truths. She'd enabled Sarah's irresponsible behavior for years, always making excuses, always bailing her out of trouble. In some ways, she'd helped create the situation that nearly destroyed her. But I wasn't that woman anymore. The coma had stolen 3 months of my life, but in a strange way, it had also given me clarity. Sometimes you have to lose everything to discover what really matters. The phone rang inside the house, but I didn't hurry to answer it. These days, most of my calls were from reporters, other victims seeking advice, or organizations wanting me to speak at their events. All of them could wait until I finished planting these tulip bulbs. Next spring, when they bloomed, they would be a reminder of this day, this moment when I chose to invest in the future instead of dwelling on the past. I patted the soil gently over the last bulb and sat back on my heels, satisfied with my work. The afternoon sun was warm on my face, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete peace with myself and my choices. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table writing in a journal I'd started keeping. Today marks 6 months since I walked into my own funeral, I wrote. Sarah and Tom are in prison, my money is mostly recovered, and my life has taken a direction I never expected. I'm no longer just Margaret Peterson, retired teacher. I'm Margaret Peterson, survivor and advocate. I've learned that the worst betrayal can sometimes lead to the most meaningful purpose. I paused, thinking about what else to write. Outside, the neighborhood was settling into evening quiet, porch lights coming on one by one. I heard a soft knock at my door and looked up to see Carol standing on my porch with a casserole dish. She'd been doing this once a week since my speech at the high school, claiming she was just making sure I was eating properly. But I knew it was really about friendship, about having someone to talk to who understood the importance of small kindnesses. I let her in, and we sat at the same table where I'd once spread out the evidence of Sarah's theft. Now it held flowers from my garden, mail from supporters around the country, and plans for my next speaking engagement. "You know," Carol said as we shared her homemade chicken and rice, "I've been thinking about something you said in your speech, about how you had to forgive yourself before you could move forward." I nodded, remembering that part of my presentation. It had been one of the hardest truths to speak out loud, that I had played a role in enabling Sarah's behavior over the years. "What made you think of that?" I asked. Carol smiled, but there was something sad in her eyes. "My sister has been asking me for money again. Same old story. A business opportunity that can't wait, a promise to pay me back that we both know is a lie." I set down my fork and looked at my friend carefully. "What are you going to do?" "For the first time in my life, I'm going to say no," she said firmly. "Your story taught me that love doesn't mean always saying yes. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable destructive behavior." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. This was why I'd started speaking publicly, why I'd shared my painful story with strangers. Not just to help people who had already been victimized, but to prevent others from going through what I had experienced. After Carol left, I walked through my house, turning off lights and checking locks. This simple routine felt precious now in a way it never had before. This was my home, my sanctuary, my space to heal and grow and plan for whatever came next. In the living room, I paused at the mantel where I'd placed a new photograph, a picture from my speaking engagement at the high school, showing me at the podium with the packed auditorium behind me. I looked confident in that photo, purposeful, like someone who had found her calling after years of simply existing. As I got ready for bed, I thought about Sarah. Not with anger anymore, but with a kind of sad acceptance. She was serving her time, learning the hard way that actions have consequences. I'd heard through Janet that she'd written me several letters from prison, but I wasn't ready to read them yet. Maybe someday I would be, but not now. The wound was still too fresh, and I'd learned to protect myself in ways I never had before. Forgiveness, I discovered, didn't mean you had to let people back into your life. It just meant you stopped letting their actions control your emotions. I climbed into bed and picked up the book on my nightstand, a novel recommended by one of the ladies in my support group. It felt good to read fiction again, to lose myself in someone else's story for a while. As I read, Whiskers jumped up and settled himself against my side, purring softly. Simple pleasures, I thought. A warm cat, a good book, the safety of my own home. These were the things that mattered, the things that couldn't be stolen or forged or sold. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more stories to tell, more people to help. But tonight I was exactly where I belonged. The last thing I did before turning out the light was look at the calendar on my bedside table. Next week I had 3 speaking engagements scheduled. A law enforcement conference, a senior center in the next county, and a university criminology class. The week after that, I was flying to Chicago to appear on a national television show about financial fraud. My calendar was fuller now than it had been during my teaching years, but this work felt different. It felt like the culmination of everything I'd learned, everything I'd survived. I was no longer just a victim of betrayal. I was someone who could help others avoid my fate. As sleep began to take hold, I thought about that morning 6 months ago when I'd awakened from my coma to discover that my daughter had declared me dead. At the time it had felt like the end of everything, my family, my trust, my sense of who I was in the world. But lying in my own bed, in my own house, surrounded by the new life I'd built from the ashes of that betrayal, I realized it had actually been a beginning. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the doorway to the best thing that could happen. You just have to be brave enough to walk through it. The clock on my nightstand ticked softly in the darkness, marking the passage of time I would never again take for granted. Each second, each minute, each hour was a gift I'd almost lost forever. But I was here, I was alive, and I had work to do. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities to share my story, to help someone else find the courage to fight back against those who would exploit trust and love for their own gain. It wouldn't bring back the daughter I thought I had, but it might prevent someone else from losing what they held dear. In the quiet darkness of my bedroom, with Whiskers purring beside me and the spring breeze stirring the curtains at my window, I felt something I'd never expected to feel again after that terrible awakening in the hospital. Happiness. Not the complicated, worried happiness of a mother concerned about her child's choices, but the clear, simple happiness of a woman who had found her purpose and embraced it fully. I had been betrayed by my own daughter, declared dead while I fought for life, robbed of my savings and nearly my sanity. But I had survived it all, and in surviving I had discovered strengths I never knew I possessed. The moonlight streaming through my window fell across the photograph on my dresser. Not the old family photos I'd put away, but a new picture from last week's support group meeting. 23 faces looked back at the camera. All of us survivors, all of us fighters, all of us proof that betrayal doesn't have to be the end of the story. It can be the beginning of something stronger, something more authentic, something built on truth instead of the shifting sand of false hope and misplaced trust. We were a family now, bound not by blood but by shared experience and mutual support. As I drifted off to sleep, my last conscious thought was of the tulip bulbs I'd planted that afternoon. Deep in the dark soil of my garden, they were already beginning the slow work of transformation, drawing strength from the earth and preparing for the day when they would emerge into the light. Like me, they had endured a period of darkness and dormancy. Like me, they would bloom again when the time was right. And when they did, they would be more beautiful for having survived the winter, more precious for having been thought lost forever. Spring would come again, and I would be there to see it, alive and whole and ready for whatever came next. The story of Margaret Peterson, the woman who walked into her own funeral and reclaimed her life, had become more than just a personal triumph. It had become a beacon of hope for anyone who had ever been betrayed by those they loved most. In community centers and courtrooms, in newspaper articles and television interviews, in the quiet conversations of my support group, the message was spreading. You don't have to be a victim forever. You can fight back. You can survive. You can even find meaning in your suffering by using it to help others. The woman who had been declared dead was more alive than she had ever been. And so my story ends not with a dramatic confrontation at the church, though that was certainly the turning point, but with this quiet moment of contentment in my own bed, in my own home, surrounded by the life I had rebuilt with my own hands. Sarah and Tom had tried to bury me, but they had only succeeded in helping me discover who I really was beneath the layers of misplaced guilt and misguided enabling. I was Margaret Peterson, teacher, survivor, advocate, and friend. I was very much alive, and I had work to do. The best chapters of my life were yet to be written. If you enjoyed this story of survival and justice, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to Granny's Voice for more inspiring true stories. Share your thoughts about Margaret's journey in the comments below. Have you or someone you know ever faced financial fraud from family members? Your story might help another viewer who's going through something similar. Remember, you're never too old to fight for what's right, and it's never too late to reclaim your life from those who would steal it. Until next time, keep listening to your inner voice, and don't let anyone convince you that you're less than you are. Thank you for listening to this story from Granny's Voice. If Margaret's courage inspired you, click the notification bell to be alerted when we share our next tale of resilience and triumph over adversity. And remember, sometimes the people who try to bury you are actually planting seeds for your greatest growth. Stay strong, stay vigilant, and never give up on yourself. There's always another chapter waiting to be written, and you hold the pen. Good night, and sweet dreams of the garden you're growing from the soil of your experiences.